On the morning of April 13th, 1975, a bus full of Palestinians was driving through the Christian neighborhood of Ain el-Rumane in East Beirut. By the time it stopped, 27 passengers were dead. Within 72 hours, over 300 people had been killed across the city. But this wasn't a beginning. It was the end of a slow-motion collapse that had been building for 6 years. This is the story of those 6 years. Remember the Cairo Agreement from 1969, the one that gave the PLO the right to operate from South Lebanon? Within a year, it was clear that agreement had opened a door that could never be closed. In September 1970, King Hussein of Jordan decided he'd had enough. The PLO had been operating freely inside his kingdom, running checkpoints, challenging his authority. On September 16th, he sent the Jordanian army against them. The fighting lasted 11 days. Thousands of Palestinians were killed. By the summer of 1971, every Palestinian fighter had been expelled from Jordan. And where did they go? Lebanon. Tens of thousands of PLO fighters poured across the border. They joined the camps already established in South Lebanon and the outskirts of Beirut. And they didn't come quietly. They came armed, organized, and determined never to be expelled again. The area they controlled in South Lebanon became known as Fatah Land, named after Yasser Arafat's Fatah faction. This wasn't just a guerrilla presence, it was a parallel state. The PLO set up checkpoints on Lebanese roads. They collected taxes from local residents. They ran their own courts, their own schools, their own security forces. They had heavy weapons, artillery, and anti-aircraft guns. In parts of the south, if you wanted to travel from one village to another, you needed PLO permission, not Lebanese government permission. For the Shia villagers living in the south, this was a nightmare with no escape. They hadn't asked for the PLO, they hadn't signed any agreement. But suddenly, foreign fighters were running their towns, and because the PLO launched attacks on Israel from their land, Israeli shells and bombs landed on their homes. The Shia were caught between two armies, and neither one answered to them. For Lebanon's Christians, this confirmed their worst fear. A foreign armed force had taken over part of the country, and the Lebanese state was too weak to stop it. If the government couldn't protect its own borders, who would? Israel's response to the PLO buildup was simple. Punish Lebanon. If Palestinian fighters launched an attack, Israel would hit back 10 times harder. And they didn't limit themselves to military targets. Israeli jets bombed villages across the south. Artillery barrages struck towns that had nothing to do with the PLO. The logic was collective punishment. Make life so miserable for the local population that they would turn against the Palestinian fighters themselves. It didn't work. It just created more suffering. But Israel also carried out assassinations deep inside Lebanese territory. The most audacious came on April 10th, 1973. Israeli commandos from the elite Sayeret Matkal unit landed on the beaches of Beirut in the middle of the night. Some of them were disguised as women. Among them was a young officer named Ehud Barak, who would later become Israel's prime minister. They drove into the heart of Beirut, walked into apartment buildings in the upscale Verdun neighborhood, and assassinated 3 senior PLO leaders, Mohammed Youssef al-Najjar, Kamal Adwan, and Kamal Nasser. They also killed Najjar's wife and a neighbor. The whole operation took about 30 minutes. Think about what that meant for Lebanon. A foreign military had just carried out assassinations in a residential neighborhood of the capital city. The Lebanese army hadn't been able to stop them. The government couldn't protect its own citizens in their own homes. For Lebanon's Muslims and the Palestinian community, the rage was directed at Israel. But for many Christians, the real outrage was that the PLO's presence had turned Beirut into a battlefield. The assassinations proved that nobody in Lebanon was safe as long as the PLO operated freely. Now here's the part of the story that most histories leave out. While the world focused on the PLO and the Christians, something extraordinary was happening among Lebanon's Shia community. And it started with one man. Imam Musa al-Sadr arrived in Lebanon from Iran in 1959. He was tall, charismatic, and brilliant. He settled in the southern city of Tyre and immediately saw what everyone in Beirut had been ignoring. The Shia were the largest community in Lebanon, and they had almost nothing. No political power, no infrastructure, no voice. For generations, the Shia had been ruled by feudal landlords who kept them poor and compliant. Their representatives in parliament served the Zuama, the political bosses, not the people. The community was invisible. Al-Sadr changed that. He built vocational centers and orphanages. He created the Higher Shia Islamic Council in 1969, giving the community its first independent religious institution. He gave speeches that made people weep. He told the Shia they didn't have to accept poverty as their fate. He told them they had rights and they deserved to fight for them. In 1974, al-Sadr founded the movement of the deprived, Harakat al-Mahroumin. The name said everything. These were the forgotten people, and they were done being forgotten. The following year, its military wing was established. It was called Amal, which means hope in Arabic. It was also an acronym. Afwaj al-Mukawama al-Lubnaniya, the Lebanese resistance detachments. For the first time, the Shia had their own political movement. Not leftist, not Palestinian, not beholden to any outside power. Lebanese, Shia, and angry. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, the Christian community was arming up fast. Pierre Gemayel's Kateb party, the Phalangists, had been building their militia since the 1930s. By the early 1970s, the Kateb regulatory forces numbered around 8,000 fighters. Camille Chamoun, the former president who had called in the U.S. Marines in 1958, formed his own militia called the Tigers, led by his son Danny. In the north, the Frangi family created the Marada Brigade, based in the mountain town of Zgharta. These weren't ragtag groups. They trained seriously. They smuggled weapons from abroad. Some sent their young men to train with foreign armies. They saw what was happening with the PLO, and they decided that if the Lebanese state wouldn't protect the Christian community, they would do it themselves. Their fear was real. The PLO was armed and growing. The Muslim population was increasing. The political system that guaranteed Christian dominance was under pressure from every direction. But their solution, building private armies, guaranteed that when the crisis came, it would be settled with guns. At the heart of everything was one simple fact. Lebanon's entire political system was built on a census from 1932. That census showed a slight Christian majority, and it became the basis for dividing power. The president would always be Maronite, the prime minister Sunni, the speaker of parliament Shia. Parliamentary seats were split 6-5 in favor of Christians. By the 1970s, everyone knew the demographics had shifted. Muslims were now the majority, but no one would agree to a new census, because a new census would mean redistributing power. The Christians who benefited from the system blocked every attempt at reform, and the Zuama on both sides preferred a broken system they could exploit over a fair one they couldn't control. Kamal Jumblat, the Druze leader, pushed for reform. He wanted to abolish confessionalism entirely and build a secular state. The left-leaning Lebanese national movement, which he led, demanded a more equitable distribution of power. But every proposal was blocked, the system was frozen, and the pressure kept building. Then, in February 1975, the fuse was lit in the southern city of Sidon. A company called Protein, a joint Lebanese-Kuwaiti venture, announced plans to monopolize commercial fishing along the coast. For Sidon's fishermen, this was an existential threat. Their families had fished these waters for generations. Now a corporation with ties to the political elite was going to shut them out. On February 26th, the fishermen marched. Their leader was Maruf Saad, a former mayor of Sidon and a popular political figure who followed the pan-Arab ideology of Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser. The Lebanese army opened fire on the demonstrators. Saad was shot and critically wounded. He died on March 6th. Sidon exploded. Protesters clashed with the army. The PLO got involved. For days, the city was a war zone. The army had killed a beloved local leader over a fishing dispute, and it proved what many Lebanese had long believed: the state served the powerful, not the people. 6 weeks later, on the morning of April 13, 1975, Pierre Gemayel, the leader of the Kateb party, was attending a church consecration in the Christian neighborhood of Ain el-Rumane in East Beirut. A car drove past and gunmen opened fire, killing a Kateb bodyguard and 3 other people. The Phalangists blamed the Palestinians. Within hours, they set up roadblocks across the neighborhood, and then a bus appeared. It was carrying Palestinians and Lebanese passengers, many of them coming from a rally at the Tal al-Zartar refugee camp. The bus was heading through Ain el-Rumaneh. Kataeb militiamen stopped it, and they opened fire. 27 passengers were killed, only the driver survived. The news spread across Beirut like fire. Within hours, fighting erupted between Palestinian and Falangist forces across the city. Snipers took up positions on rooftops. Neighborhoods that had coexisted for decades became front lines. In 3 days, over 300 people were dead. Nobody knew it yet, but the Lebanese Civil War had begun. It would last 15 years. It would kill over 150,000 people. It would destroy the country that had once called itself the Paris of the Middle East. But on April the 13th, 1975, most people still thought it would blow over in a week. The bus massacre wasn't the cause of the Lebanese Civil War. It was the match that fell on gasoline that had been pooling for decades. A political system that refused to adapt. A foreign armed presence the state couldn't control. Communities that had armed themselves because they trusted their militias more than their government. And a region that treated Lebanon as a chessboard for its own conflicts. In the next episode, Beirut splits in two. The Green Line divides a city that once had no walls. Massacres escalate on both sides. And Syria sends its army across the border to decide Lebanon's fate. The war has only just begun.